or disabled, it has connotations of something you cannot or are unable to do. So already the soldier has lost something. This poem is about a soldier who has returned from war having lost all of his limbs. Ultimately, he reflects on his life before the war and repeatedly juxtaposes this to how his life is now in the present. The poem emphasises the impact of war physically, but also their psychosis and life options as a result of coming home from war in these kinds of conditions. Now, the first stanza is from Owen's perspective, and Owen himself does not have first experience of what it is like to be an amputee, so he's merely an observer, and he presents the physical images associated with the disfigurement of the soldiers after the war. So openly, he starts with, he sat in a wheelchair waiting for dark. Owen uses this third person of he to highlight that this not only is the soldier unnamed, but it's really representative of others, of many, that there are multiple people in this same situation. He also uses he to show a loss of identity. No longer is he his own person, he's merely a he. Now, the diction of wield and waiting emphasize that the soldier is not able to do things for himself anymore. It is not simply a wheelchair, it is wheeled because he relies on others to gain mobility and to push the chair for him. In the second line, shivered in the ghastly suit of grey, really Owen has used choice of dark colours here to create this kind of bland, negative, depressing mood, not only of the physical state in his life, but also his mental state. So this, married with the word shivered, really presents an image of a cold person sitting in quite a dark and desolate place. He continues this image with legless, sewn short at the elbow, through the park, and this really presents the extent of his injuries and also gives us a little bit of idea of the setting. Now, Owen uses an interesting image here to again contrast what his life was and what it is now. So he uses the repetition here of the voices, starting off with voices of boys that rang saddening like a hymn. And then he repeats this with voices of play and pleasure after day. So the repetition of these voices highlight that this man will never, that high modality there, possess again such voices of innocence. The simile is used really to suggest religious imagery because we know that hymns are sad songs and often sung at funerals, so they're highly associated with death. And it's quite emphatic of the fact that his outlook for the future is quite bleak. He doesn't really have a lot of opportunities now due to his physical disfigurement. So we sort of get this image of helplessness already in the first stanza. And Owen concludes this stanza by saying, "Till gathering sleep had mothered them from him." So sleep is really symbolic of the soldier's only respite because he does not really find peace in reality in the everyday situations of life. So he no longer finds simple pleasures as a result, and he's got really nothing, to live for or worth living for in his life. So he sort of prefers this temporary respite of sleep. And this is really what shows he's ultimately alienated from society. The fact that Owen uses this mothered image here presents this kind of childlike figure. So no longer is he, a soldier that's masculine or manly, but is someone that's solely dependent on others. Later in the poem, we see women again, and they are contrasted as kind of a caring person, in this loving role of a mother, as well as, the role of a lover, which is no longer a possibility for him. Stanzas 2 contrast back in time. So we see Owen delve into the subject's past when he was not disabled at this point in his, youth. And we see this juxtaposition of the present to the past through about this time, town used to swing so gay. So, and, again, later on in the stanza here, in old times. So he's really, these lines are elegiac, when he's remembering his past and kind of mourning the life that he once had before he acquired these injuries. But in his memories, he's really thinking back to times that were past and times that he's enjoying, such as when glow lamps budded in the night blue trees and girls glance lovelier, and the air grew dim. So here we sort of see this alliteration of the G's, which links to images of beauty of these situations, both of the nighttime and having fun in the nighttime, and also flirting with girls here. This is kind of emphasized again in the romance of the air grew dim, so linking to girls, and this juxtaposes against the menacing dark of the first stanza. So his present life is quite depressing, but here it's quite beautiful. The fact that these girls glance lovelier, it shows that even though it's nighttime and it's dark, these girls still find this man attractive, and he's kind of impressed by that and got a little bit of ego about him, that even though as the nighttime gets darker, these girls are still glancing, at him beautifully, batting their eyelids, etc. But this is all reflective, and as it says here, before he threw away his knees. Now, the diction of threw really shows that the soldier lost his legs, almost in kind of this careless and reckless sacrifice that, that is nothing and hasn't been on purpose. It's without reason. So it's almost as if he's taken responsibility of that war. He didn't do the right thing by looking after himself and making sure that he protected himself. So he almost kind of willingly threw this sacred possession away. So the result is really quite bleak in the next line. Now he will never feel again how slim girls' waists are, or how warm their subtle hands. So he's really saying here, again, this use of high modality to show the finality of the event, that this is not really possible for him anymore. So it's not only the physical loss of his limbs, but also the psychological scars, as soldiers, kind of realize they now will be shunned from women as a result of their physical disability. So it's here we really see the society's attitude as a whole, not just that of women, but really society's attitude to disability as a whole. And these are things that really define women, their waists and their subtle hands, these delicate and quite feminine features. So this is something that obviously is a significant loss to this young man. Again, this kind of contrasts his past to the present, as before, his life was warm and is now shivering, okay? So again, you can use that contrast there. The fact that in this last line of the stanza, all, so this is a universal nature of this experience. It's not just some women, but all women. So the fact that they will touch him like some queer disease. Owen uses this, simile here as a reminder of the symptoms and representation of disease society, not only that was manifested and caused by war, but, he is the sickness. Women don't touch him like he has a queer disease, but rather he is a queer disease. So really showing the degradation that these men faced as a result of war. Now, stanza 3 again presents the image of the past and, his normal life before becoming, amputee, and when he was, had his youth and vitality. And in this sort of first stanza, it's saying that he was observed by that of total strangers, this artist that thought he had quite a beautiful, youthful face. So it's interesting here because, again, there's a bit of a juxtaposition that kind of forces a us versus them attitude between the reader and the subject. The remembrances of the subject offer an illustration of a typical life with which the reader can relate, which is then placed next to the lines of the poem that offer a picture really Owen would hope the reader to define as quite a horrible existence, something that was, worse than death. The fact that, now he is old and will never be, now he is old, his back will never brace. So looking at this whole idea of the fact that even though, as it says, he was younger than his youth just last year, so showing what a significant change this war has impacted on these young men. They are still very young. You have to remember that a lot of these men, in inverted commas, were actually boys. They were signing up at, 16, 17, 18 years of age. So if they've lasted the whole duration of the war, they're really still under the age of 25. Yet the experiences and the atrocities that they faced faced during the wartime has really aged them so significantly, even within just a year. So, even though they've come back alive, it's almost the irony of, which is worse, coming back from war dead, or coming back from war disfigured, disabled, and, almost wishing you were dead. So this is, what Owen says. He lost his colour very far from here. So this is really another kind of colour imagery, okay, which aims to represent energy of life and health, and contrasting this to how it is now. So this married with the poured, okay, this diction again here, is quite an effective verb, and it's active, suggesting that he's quite naive and is partly responsible for his own life, like we saw in the previous stanza with, threw away his knees. So, it's actually showing that they have really done this to themselves. And we see this imagery in the remaining of the stanza here, of his life literally bleeding out through the veins. You get this image of the leap of purple spurting from his thigh. So again, purple is quite a colour which denotes life and vitality, and shows the ordeals that the soldier had to go through, and having been injured, that this has really had a deep impact on him, and no longer does he really feel alive or any desire to want to live further. Stanza 3 is really quite an interesting one, because this is almost, looking at the irony of hindsight here, that maybe if he had had some smarter decisions, this might not be a possibility in his life. So this next stanza really discusses the subject's reasons for entering the war. So in contrast to the stanza before, he talks about, in the first line, once he liked a blood smear down his leg. So we get this sort of sports imagery that's often linked with battle and war, but here it's really contrasted to show that he used to enjoy sport, and it was masculine, and, to get a blood smear on your leg showed how hard you physically played, and that you were victorious, and it was the glory that comes, as a result of having these kind of battle scars. So this is quite ironic, because already we're aware that the soldier has lost arms and legs at this point, yet we're told before the war that he felt proud to have injuries that he, gained from being on the football field. And as it says here, it was after the matches that he was carried shoulder high. So emphasizing, this glory of the match by physically being, carried around by his teammates, and, pats on the back and all that sort of thing. So it's, the celebration of, these injuries, as opposed to the helplessness he now faces. So again, it's kind of the concept of the reversal, the sporting hero to cripple, handsome to queer disease, colour to dark, warm to cold. It's these contrasts that are kind of used throughout the time. So Owen then sort of admits that when he signed up was after the game, after they've gone out, when he's drunk as a peg. So, we know alcohol decreases the ability to think clearly and properly. So this is the time where he's actually made the decision. As he says, he thought he'd better join, but he wonders why. So he didn't actually have any true reasons or justified reasons as why he wanted to join the war. It was really, he just, was out with his mates out on the lash at the night, and decided this was as good a time as any to sign up for the war. So then Owen presents an indication of why he's joined up. So the fact that someone said he looked good in kilts. So this gives a bit of an indication that possibly he was a member of the Scottish regiments, and also highlights kind of this egotistical and vain motive that he had for joining the army. Reminds us the fact that it was really his pride that caused him to be in this position. The exact thing that he'd been proud of. He would never again run in the field or score a winning goal, and never be praised for being a hero. He's actually only pitied endlessly for being a cripple. So again, this kind of irony here. And then he kind of accumulates here other reasons. So not just the fact that he egotistically looked good in the kilt, but also to please his girlfriend Meg, and also to please the other women, these giddy jilts that he talks about here. So even though he sort of questions here why he's joining, he gives some sort of reasons. But this line probably is the most interesting in terms of controversy. The next two lines here about the fact that he says, he asked to join, he didn't have to beg. Smiling, they wrote his lie, aged 19 years. So, the fact that the recruiters are smiling while they write down his details emphasizes their culpability here, that it's them who's actually done the wrong thing. It's their crime. They have allowed this young man to sign up under false pretenses. The fact that they smiled, they are thinking to themselves, yeah, good one, mate. You're not even close to 18 years of age, but you know what? We need plenty of soldiers to fight this war, so if you're prepared, we'll happily sign you up. We'll write your information down. So, it's clear that he's underage when he enlisted, and therefore, even after the war, again, emphasizing the fact he's still very young after 4 years. The next stanza moves to thinking about the reasons what was beneficial about going to the war. And really, at this point, as it says, Germans he scarcely thought of. So he wasn't really thinking about the main reasons for going to war. He wasn't nervous about the Germans, and he certainly, as it says here, the Austrians did not move him. So he wasn't actually concerned about issues going to the war. So even though these are what we consider decent reasons, these ironically are not what motivate him to join the war. It's interesting here though, Owen personifies fear through the capital letter to show that it's important. This is not just, a small concept. At this point, he didn't have any fear, but it was to come. Okay, that this was actually a concept and something to be nervous of. Then he sort of accumulates here to see the silliness of the reasons why the soldier did join. Saying the drought of jeweled hills. So actually talking about the fact that, we know Europe is quite beautiful, and to actually see the sun reflecting on the hills is almost like having, diamonds sparkle in your eyes, or some sort of, beautiful jewel. And then he talks about some other reasons, for daggers and plaid socks. It's about the uniform. The uniform's, pretty cool compared to some of the others. And, the smart salutes, this whole idea of, sir, yes, sir, and marching in time, and, the care of arms, actually looking after your gun and being responsible and how to shoot a weapon. And probably the last two things, which are the benefits of any job, that you get time off and you certainly get paid for it. So there were some significant benefits for why this soldier wanted to join. So the fact that, he uses these examples actually is interesting, because this was kind of the lies that these young men were sold, even though they were told that war was going to be this fabulous, glorifying opportunity, it was actually, soon to be a life of chaos that they experienced once they were at war. So, esprit de corps and hints for young recruits basically suggests as soon as he was drafted, he was basically sent off with, drums and cheers. So very similar to the sports imagery we saw before. This last stanza, though, is probably a little bit more depressing and reflective of the lack of acknowledgement. Okay, it's sort of a transition for the soldier's memories to his current status. So again, the reader is kind of jarred by this juxtaposition of the normal and the abnormal. So instead of receiving, this hero's welcome like he used to on the soccer field, he's actually subjected to patronizing memories of his own, of what he imagined his return would be like. So the fact that, someone would cheer him home, but the reality is it's not actually the same sorts of cheers that he got when he received a goal. So he kind of recalls the images of football matches earlier mentioned in the stanzas, and implies that even though this repetition of the cheer is created, there's actually a very different contrast between when he was cheered at the football match. Yet here, despite having really arguably a greater achievement in the war for a far greater loss than, simple blood-smeared leg, the low modality of some opposed to all shows the contrast. The fact that the crowd's reception to soldiers returning home is more hollow and less sort of appreciated. So the only person that really acknowledges this man is, this solemn man. So the fact that the irony is re-enlist the help of pity. As the reader, we're encouraged to feel sorry for the subject here. We're encouraged to feel sorry for his decision to go to war and subsequently the loss of his limbs. So, Owen's purpose here is to show that those who return from war and are injured are pitied for their loss rather than being honoured for their sacrifice. And, this man gives him this tokenistic gift of the fruit to kind of congratulate him and be thankful for the efforts he made on the battlefield. It's interesting here when he says about inquiring about his soul. This provides some religious imagery again, that it's possible that this man is a homecoming minister. It's actually his job to inquire about the soldiers when they return home. But it also provides a notion of death imagery as he kind of discusses his soul. This is the last thing that lives, as almost as if it's his own funeral and is thanking him for his life. So it's really juxtaposing the lamenting of the loss of his limbs and certainly his body as a whole. This last stanza ends with very similar sad imagery that we had in the first stanza. Now he will spend a few sick years in institutes. So now the diction of now is obviously showing it's back to the present, but also the modality of absolution here. This is definitely how he will spend the rest of his life, and really affirms again this sickness imagery of the queer disease in stanza 1. So it really highlights that he has to wait for others to do things for here. He has this huge lack of control in his life, and he will do what the rules tell him to. He's not able to actually make decisions. And he's really going to take the pity anyone's willing to give him, because he's no longer an active man. He is quite old before his time, and he's now going to be stuck in rehabilitation and hospital institutions for the rest of his life. And so he really acknowledges that, therefore, he will do things that the rules consider wise. So he's actually accepted society's estimation on his worth, or really lack thereof. So the passive kind of young veteran that he has become is now a life without fight. But even though he'll continue to follow the orders of society, he is certainly seemed invalid. He's basically deemed invalid by this society. So he is officially disabled at this point in every sense of the word. Fast forwarding to tonight, he now noticed the women's eyes pass from him to the strong men that were whole. So the repetition again of what the soldier has lost, and this time he's implying the attractiveness to the opposite sex. So again, the diction of whole implies that he is not this, he's incomplete, that he himself is less than a man because his body is, fractured and fragmented. So the subject's reasons for joining the military, concerned with, the masculinity and sexual attraction in previous stanzas, is ironically juxtaposed here with the total loss of sexuality. Owen implies is a total loss of identity as well, except as a spectacle, and really is an object of pity. So he's nothing more than these things now. And he finally concludes the poem by these rhetorical questions and the repetition of the why don't they come. So it really, again, emphasizes the dependence on others that this young man now has, and how he basically has to wait for either the orderlies or nurses, which are the epitome of the lack of control of his own body and ultimately his fate. So also it's quite metaphorical here to mean further death imagery. So when it says how cold and late it is, so as something cold often reminds us of death and late in terms of time. So we know he's waiting for the night, as we saw in the first stanza, waiting for the lateness to come. So he's essentially asking here, when is death finally going to put him to bed and, ultimately out of his misery.